in the midst of his busy schedule, it's a great pleasure for us to have had Dr. Somanathan, someone of his seniority and erudition, come and engage with us here today. We'll move on to the next session. The next panel is about the role of venture capital in inclusive development. And it's a really stellar panel that has come together, which we are delighted to have. I will only introduce the moderator, who is someone we've had a long association with and over the past several years has deepened because of our work in India specifically. Soumya Rajan is the founder and CEO of Waterfield Advisors, and she will chair this session. Waterfield Advisors is the largest multifamily office and wealth advisory firm in India. And with over 25 years of experience in private banking and wealth advisory, Soumya commenced her career first at ANZ Grindlays Bank, which later became Standard Chartered, and worked for 17 years with the bank, both in India and in Singapore. In 2011 is when she established Waterfield Advisors, and I know that based on interactions with Soumya and her team, that it's going from strength to strength, and we wish it the best. So Soumya, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much. Very happy to have my other panelists also join me. Chris, Sriram, Prabhat, Prashant, please. So good afternoon, everyone, and it's a real pleasure to be here with all of you. I'm the founder and CEO of Waterfield Advisors, and we have 4 very distinguished panelists with us. I'll just give a quick introduction, though I think for many, no introduction is really needed. First, I'd like to introduce Chris Gopalakrishnan, who's the chairman of Accelor Ventures, an accelerator that helps startups during the early stages of their business journey. Of course, better known as being the co-founder of Infosys, and served as its MD and CEO between 2007 and 2011, and then thereafter as the vice chair between 2011 to 2014. He was conferred the Padma Bhushan, the country's 3rd highest civilian honor, in January of 2011. He's a recognized business leader and a technology thought leader, and presently chairs the Reserve Bank of India's Innovation Hub, and is the chairman of the CII Center of Excellence in Innovation, Entrepreneurship, and Startups. Many of you may not know, but he also is fairly multifaceted in terms of having founded Itihasa Research and Digital, which publishes the history of the Indian IT industry, and has co-authored a book and has philanthropic interests in areas like brain research. He actively invests in the startup world and supports the ecosystem through his investments and, more importantly, mentoring. The other panelist I'd like to introduce is Mr. Prashant Pathak. Prashant is the CEO of Ekagrata, a business-building-oriented holding and investment company. He is also the principal of In Color Capital, a principal investment company. He's an active owner and spends considerable time in boards in terms of oversight roles, both in public and private companies. Prashant also serves on the board of Mars Discovery District, which is North America's largest urban innovation hub, headquartered in Toronto. He's on the board of the Fields Institute. I can tell you that kind of rang a bell for me because I'm a mathematician. An international center for scientific research in mathematical sciences and mathematics-related innovation. Prashant has previously been an appointee of the Government of Canada on the board of Business Development Bank of Canada, an $18 billion institution, and served as the chairman of the venture capital as well as the investment committees for BDC Venture Capital, which is Canada's leading VC program. We also have with us Mr. Sriram Vishwanathan. Sriram is the founding managing partner of Celesta Capital, a global venture capital fund which has built a portfolio of world-class technology companies. He has more than 30 years of experience both in technology business operations as well as venture capital experience. Prior to Celesta, Sriram was the founder of Indasage Partners, which was a cross-border venture firm which invested in innovative companies in the US-India corridor, and spent about close to 20 years in Intel Corp in senior leadership roles at that time. And lastly, we have Mr. Prabhat Sethi, former managing director of Murdoch Media and is the current CEO of Crown Acquisitions and executive chairman of Blackford. So as you can see, we have an extremely distinguished panel here with a lot of knowledge, and I hope that in this session we can actually get a lot of perspective on their roles on the topic of the panel, which is really on the role of venture capital in sustainable development and inclusive growth. I'll just set the context a little before we actually get into the questions. A recent report by the S&P Global suggested that the share of global venture capital in India was actually going to double from where it is right now to in the next 7 years. India currently has about 4% of that share, 41% is sitting with the US, 18% with China, but that's expected to accelerate in the next 7 years. But at the same time, while we're seeing accelerating global venture capital into India, you also had a recent UNCTAD World Investment Report that really reveals that there's a widening annual investment deficit for developing countries when they are looking at how they achieve their sustainable development goals. So we have a deficit of almost about 4 trillion, which is going to be there year on year. This was 2.5 trillion when the SDGs were first launched. So on the one hand, you've got global flows which are going to increase in India, and on the other, you've got developing economies which are really at a deficit in terms of the capital that they need to reach their SDGs. So in this panel, what we're hoping to achieve is really to see how is venture capital going to create the right incentives which can then help us accelerate and enable us to get faster outcomes to our SDGs, the role of innovation in terms of solving for age-old problems through newer solutions, how can we address issues around social inequality, environmental concerns, and build healthier communities, and lastly, how do we deep dive into the role that venture capital will play in sustainability, and more specifically, a little bit on climate change. So I'm going to start by addressing my first question to Chris, which is really, Chris, you've been someone who has been a real inspirational leader in terms of your journey. And you now are working very closely with the startup community as a mentor and investor. And from your unique vantage point, how do you see venture capital really transforming the landscape of sustainable development for more inclusive growth in India?
So thank you, Amar, for inviting me. See, venture capital backs risky startups, risky technology development. Venture capital is the first investor in new initiatives in healthcare, new initiatives in climate change, risky endeavors, risky startups and things like that. So in that sense, you can say that venture capital in fact enables, and if you have a robust risk capital environment, more and more technologies will go towards addressing some of these problems. From my own vantage point, from my investments, etc., I can tell you that we have investments in increasing farmer income, helping tribal farmers. Araku is an example. There is a agriculture startup, Cropin, that we are supporting. In cancer care, Karkinos is looking at cancer diagnostics at a scale that is unprecedented, I believe. And again, of course, they need to scale this up, but that's an example of how cancer care is made affordable. MedGenome is reducing the cost of DNA sequencing in the country. So I can go on listing, the number of investments, not just me, others are doing also, in some sense, helping. Now, if you then take it down to the next level and saying, how do we look at making sure that these scale up and these also don't tomorrow stagnate. You need a robust ecosystem for new startups to emerge. You need a mechanism for addressing the issue of cost, so that solutions are affordable, solutions are widely deployed, solutions create impact, etc. One of the interesting things I see in India is the ability to work with government closely, because government has the ability to reach the nook and corner, ability to scale and things like that. And I have many examples where we are working very closely with the government so that the impact is large, the scale is huge, costs are lower. Just look at the whole India stack itself, right? At zero transaction costs, real time, you can reach anybody, and you can transfer money to anybody in the country at zero cost in real time. Now that whole thing is enabled as a public-private partnership, private digital public infrastructure. That's the India stack, the UID, the payment gateways and things like that. And on top of that, private innovation. It's a great example of how we've all worked together to make sure that, and because of that, 80% of India can do digital transactions. I think 15-20% have credit cards or debit cards and things like that. Number of bank accounts have increased, but 80% of people are doing digital transactions today. Adults, who can do. That's a great example of how impact has been created at the scale of a country of India's size.
And I think some very interesting comments there around just the affordable cost and also public-private partnership and government really coming in as well and are working with government to that extent. Sriram, my question was to you next, which is really around the fact that once you have this private capital, which is finding its way to these disruptive technologies, and you've worked a lot with newer technologies, what are some of the sectors which you are specifically seeing as a venture capitalist, which are in some ways aligning to areas around sustainable development? And do you see a convergence at some point between sustainable development and disruptive technologies?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for having me on the panel, and MR and the rest of the team in Indiaspora. It's always a pleasure to come to the Indiaspora events. Like this session that we had before lunch was so powerful, and I think that made all of our trips and jet lag every bit worth it. So thank you, MR, for having great sessions. So to your question about critical and disruptive technologies, I think the premise of your question is pretty unique, because you seem to suggest that these things are separate and are in sustainable technologies and disruptive technologies. And I'd like to submit that they are not really, because effectively every new disruptive technology has to be thought of through the lens of sustainability. Because if I can just take you back to the early days of the computer industry, I had the benefit of working in the early days when 64K RAM was all you had in your computer, and you had to ensure that your programming that was done efficiently. So people actually thought of writing efficient code, and and there was scarcity of compute resources, memory resources, energy resources. So you were trained to actually think of optimizing whatever you create, whatever technology you created, in the most efficient manner. And thanks to Moore's law and Metcalfe's law, that constraint got removed, and the cost of compute just precipitously dropped. So a unit of compute became practically free. So as a consequence, I think we all developed bad habits. So we all ended up building technology, more than that we needed, utilizing resources more than we should. And as a consequence, even though we all got benefited by, iPhone 10 and 11 and 12 and 13, it's kind of like, training a dog with a fancy treat. every 3 hours. And so we expect the iPhone 15, whether we need it or not, we expect the iPhone 16 to come right after for marginal improvement. And that's fundamentally a very big problem. I think the industry is starting to recognize that you have to look at critical technologies through the lens of sustainability. And there are lots and lots of areas for it. And specifically, power efficiency. So technologies that require lower power and lower power for all sorts of applications, whether it's things that you carry in your battery life, for instance. Extension of battery life is the most common way you and I sort of relate to utilizing lesser power, because the chips that are made in those devices that we use are far more efficient. So in a way, what you may not think of as sustainability actually connects to sustainability every single step of the way. And you can extend it to a variety of other industries. You can think about construction, for instance. So we're actually an investor in a company that actually creates cement from organic material. So it's bacterial cement, if you will, that actually absorbs carbon dioxide. So you can actually think of having all these monstrous buildings, but they actually serve a purpose of cleaning the air. So what if every building was required to be built with organic cement? And likewise, I think there are things in education and things in healthcare that are all target rich for innovation using sustainable technologies. So I maybe one of those people in the camp of thinking that ESG, that has come about as a sort of a fancy term, actually should be banned, because you don't really need to create a new set of technologies and call them sustainable technologies, when in reality, everything that we build should be sustainable. EV, every car should be an EV car. There's no excuse in the 21st century for us to drive a fossil fuel-based car. It simply is not the right thing to do for the environment. It simply is not the right thing to do for all the industries that are polluting the planet. So there are lots of ways we can actually do that. So that's sort of the way I would think about it.
So just perhaps asking Prabhat the question, which is taking on from what Sriram mentioned, that looking at disruptive technologies through the sustainability lens, but there could also be another camp that says that you're taking away my job. And in that sense, creating more social inequality. We stand as investors and beneficiaries of that technology, but is that also an ethical dilemma that's getting created when you look at spaces like AI or otherwise? So Prabhat, love to get your comments on that.
Thank you for the question, and firstly, thank you to the Indiaspora team for bringing us all together and creating such a wonderful platform over the last 3 days. Look, before I answer the question, I have to perhaps start with a personal bias of mine, and that is that I'm an eternal optimist. And I think in terms of focusing on this question, I believe that venture capital in particular, which is the focus of this conversation, has played a significant role in unleashing the entrepreneurial boom that we're all experiencing in India today and that we're all excited by. And I think VC-backed companies have and delivered and have been agents for positive change in many cases. And I think if I look at the Indian context, which is what we're all interested in, financial services penetration, phone pay, Upgrad, Practo, these are just some examples of VC-backed companies in India that have delivered positive change. In terms of, I think, the opportunity here and what's going on and disruption, there's not a day that goes by when ChatGPT, generative AI, Elon Musk's comments aren't creating a lot of angst. But in coming here, I thought it might be positive to look at some of the positive things that are coming out, maybe to remove a little bit of angst from people as they sort of look at what's going on. So in India, last year alone, 75,000 startups were registered. And it's just a huge number, making it the third largest VC-backed ecosystem in the world. Revenues from VC and PE-backed businesses in India were 25 billion last year, building and expected to be building to 200 billion over the next 5 years. In terms of unemployment and employment, just looking at this really closely, the VC ecosystem in India has created 26 lakh jobs over the last 5 years. So when we talk about unemployment, disruption, social inequality, we need to think about that. 2.7 lakh jobs were created last year alone by VC-backed firms. So for me, for every piece of disruption that comes up, there's another piece of opportunity that allows for greater opportunities for people to participate. A little known fact in India, VC-backed business contributed to 44%, outside of pharma, 44% of all R&D investment. So I think the opportunities are there. I think a lot of it is getting created, but I think the opportunities for employment and job growth and all of these things are significant, and we'll see more of that.
So it really does outweigh, in some sense, the societal concerns that we might have at this point.
Look, I think guardrails and regulatory interventions are always there, and I think, in fact, if you look at the India experience, I think India leads the pack. If you look at the universal payments interface, if you look at ONDC, if you look at the Indian regulatory environment banning foreign marketplace businesses from competing against their own sellers, there's always opportunities to improve the system, and I think India itself is doing quite well.
Prashant, my next question is to you, which is really because you've been spending so much of your time in the VC private equity space and also looking at really, and I think we were speaking at lunch a little before, in terms of there is almost a dichotomy in the definition of venture capital on the one side and sustainable development on the other. So how do you look at it from a return on investment, ROI perspective, on when you're looking as a venture capitalist to make an investment into a project or a company or fund which is specifically in sustainability? How are you then trying to get your head around the short-term versus the long-term perspective in both these two areas?
Thanks, Soumya. Before I do that, I'll take a quip on Sriram. Sriram, electric vehicles are nice, but I don't believe you've driven in -30 in a blizzard when Tesla shows it's fully charged and it discharges 15 minutes on the road. So we can all celebrate, and I think I'm being facetious, but the point is, there is a spectrum to this discussion, and I agree with almost everything he said except for that electric vehicle thing, because he's right on ESG. He's right on ESG that we can't really take the ESG mantle too far, and I agree with Sriram. But coming to your question, I think that, the short answer, Soumya, I would say, if you're really pressed for time, is there a interconnect between VC and sustainability as we see today? The short answer is no. It doesn't exist. And we can debate it, we can talk about it here till we are blue in the face. The short answer, it'll be performative. Right. The long answer is why is there a dichotomy? I think there are three things I was scribbling down. One is people don't think through the agency cost of venture capital and sustainability. Second thing is they don't think through the conflict between inherent cost of capital issues between venture capital and sustainability. Third thing is there is a horizon conflict between venture capital time frames as venture capital defined today, not as, as Chris mentioned, venture capital, which is what we aspire to. Georges Doriot, I happen to have been admitted to the school where he taught at, who is kind of the father of venture capital. How he thought about venture capital is not what we are doing today. We want to make an app which is going to get a unicorn valuation, and people have dropped the word unicorn on this stage 15 times as if that's a milestone. Nonsense. If that's our milestone, then we should pack up and not talk about sustainability and inclusivism, right? And then the last thing is a moral hazard. So very quickly, agency cost. Most GPs have little to no influence on their portfolio companies. They would like to think they have. They would like to think they can, other than changing the CEO, which often is a very, it's an act of contortion. Go and talk to the guys at Uber. They'll tell you, and there are many stories in India. So there's an agency cost there. There's an agency cost between the GPs and the LPs, the limited partners in the fund, right? The LPs have an agency issue with the GPs. And then between the portfolio companies, there's an agency issue. So that's kind of one aspect. The cost of capital orientation, right? Which is, you talked about the word ROI, right? Yeah. What is the ROI on clean water? What is the ROI on clean air? So we invest our private capital, and I think Gene and I were chatting offline. Is when you invest your private capital and you take a time horizon, you want to make returns in the long run because, as we discussed at lunch, making money is important.
It's important.
But the question is the outcome the objective, or is the return the objective, right? And I'll give you one quip, which is like, people talk about CAPM, capital asset pricing model, which underpins all these things. And I say CAPM is crap, which is completely redundant asset pricing. It doesn't mean anything because VCs are looking at investing at $1, can I get 30x? So it's a return orientation versus an outcome orientation, conflict immediately. Right. And then the last piece is horizons, like what is the time? Right. Like, I heard Chris talk about agri. He will be the first to tell you, you don't grow a tree in 1 year or 2 years, you grow trees in 20 years, 30 years, right? So the horizons change. And until we resolve those issues from a fundamental of venture capital perspective, we can have a lot of these very interesting conversations. And we'll be 10 years later, we'll say, oh yeah, some outcomes work, most of them didn't.
But
so it's a bit of a contrarian view, but in my view, I think that's what I see.
So, but just to come in here a little, don't you think that the fact that you've got venture capital money in there will at least accelerate some of the outcomes that you will get in terms of sustainability?
In terms of sustainability?
Yes, and in more inclusive growth, because the venture capitalist in some way is actually investing into these disruptive technologies.
So a lot of venture capitalists do. I'm saying a lot of venture capitalists do. I say that with a lot of respect to all venture capitalists, including being critical of myself. But I'll give you two examples, as Aditya and I were discussing at lunch, right? When quantum computing was a twinkle in the eye of most people, this thing, most venture capitalists were running away from it. I happen to have been part of a Government of Canada organization where we essentially approved investments in the world's first quantum computing device, and everybody was fearful. Everybody was fearful. Why? Because who's gonna bell the cat? When the government asks the question that who approved the investment in something which may never see the light of day, who's gonna answer to the taxpayer?
True.
Now roll forward 10 years later, when the same company wants to be on the cover of Time magazine, guess who gets the credit for it? Bezos Expeditions.
Correct. Understood.
So the point is, venture capitalists of today, I'm not talking about the notion that Chris going out in agri as a frontier player.
Yes.
Venture capitalists of today, generally in the industry, are folks who are looking at saying a return orientation versus an outcome orientation. Or I was talking to Carl Mehta, I think, in the morning, and I said, where are the people investing in fusion today? I can tell you, the other company on the cover of Time magazine is General Fusion. It's a Canadian company. We were involved in investing in it. But where's the return gonna be? Probably never. Never. But the fact is, that's really what's going to drive sustainability forward. So there is this, I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just giving you views on, we as a collective, whether it's India or Indians and Canadians, you have to reconcile that, Soumya.
Sriram, you want to come in?
I was just going to.
Yeah, you want to come in.
I was just going to say, I almost entirely agree with everything you said, except for a few things. But we won't debate that. But no, but the point that you made, which really struck for me, was that it was called Silicon Valley. It was not called App Valley, right? So in the original way by which technology got created, it was all hardcore technologists. These were not people that were looking at CAPM models. These are people that were actually looking at what does it make to build a transistor? What does it make to build the next networking chip or networking computer, whatever? That drove Silicon Valley, and I think nobody would debate it. Venture capital was perfected in Silicon Valley. Everywhere else, there were a lot of tourists. And in fact, I would submit that people that have not built businesses themselves, bloody their nose, lost money, lost their shirt, lost their investor shirt, invariably those people end up becoming great operators because they know they've made the mistakes. So you can't be in venture capital by perfecting a spreadsheet. And invariably what I find, or maybe it's the tide is shifting a little bit here, in the last 5-7 years in India, there have been lots of people that have actually funded great apps, but they don't build sustainable businesses. Forget, for instance, sustainability in the traditional sense, but they don't build everlasting businesses. So all of these companies, they may be great companies, they may provide unicorn status for a lot of GPs, but they are not the ones that I would say build long-term value. No, we are a fund that invests almost exclusively on deep tech. We invest in the hard things. We invest in semiconductors. We invest in in sensors. We invest in, real hard, materials, next generation chemistry. These are the sorts of things that one has to do if you really want to have long-term value creation. And I think, Prashant, you would agree that these are the areas that I think are long-term enriching, if you will.
I think, Chris, you wanted to come in?
Yeah. So we need to step back. It's not, one view is correct or another, so only deep tech and hardcore technologies versus app or social media or something like that. I think what we need to step back to see is venture capital is a class of asset that looks at taking high risk and creating returns for taking those high risks. At the average level, probably the returns are not going to be much higher than what a public market would give you. But it's an asset class which is structured such that you can accept a lot more failures than what you would accept in the public markets. So that's point one I want to make. And whether you invest in, and your time horizon can be different because the type of fund will decide on the time horizon that you have. Because you are setting the expectations for your investors, saying that, I'm going to give you returns in 15 years versus 5 years or 6 years. The 5-year fund will probably look at how can I get return in the 5-year horizon. So, but that's the nature of venture capital. One is not bad, other one is not good. We have to look at what is the nature of the company, what is the nature of the fund, and think about it. Now coming back to sustainable enterprises, that's a very different aspect of running a business. You have to think about, fairness. You have to think about equity. You have to think about customer. Building a sustainable business, building a business that will last for a long time means longevity is the measure of success than anything else. And you have to build a business for longevity. Then only you will get a sustainable business. You can't take short-term decisions and assume that you will create a long-term business. So that's a separate aspect. The third aspect is, which I wanted to say is, as individuals, I don't want to say funds because funds are purposes, but or goals, but as individuals, as societal entities, we need to think about making money gives you a responsibility to spend it wisely. You are not going to take it with you when you die. So how do you deploy that money properly? And this is where balancing between giving back and making money is the most important thing. And that's what you are hinting at, and that's what you also were saying when you said every business has to be a sustainable business from a climate, because that's a priority for the entire world today. We are seeing, the amount of money that's lost, for example, in Hawaii, right, in the fire, is plus the lives lost, irretrievable, right? So the losses are mounting, and the US taxpayers will pay ultimately for all that, reconstruction, etc. So, so we need to think about how as a society, we can encourage giving back, we can encourage philanthropy. So a same person may be running a profitable organization, but also be a philanthropist. And that's what we need to think about when you look at all these things.
Great. Thanks for all those very interesting perspectives. I don't know whether we could just open it to the audience for about 2 or 3 questions. Yes, please.
I could start while he's bringing the, my name is Upendra Giri, and मेरी ज़ुबान पर मत जाइए, 32 साल से मैं अमेरिका में हूँ. जननी जन्मभूमि और ज़ुबान मुझे बहुत पसंद है और अपने दिल के करीब रखता हूँ. फर्स्ट इनिंग आई थॉट कि भाई जब अटल बिहारी वाजपेयी साहब ने बोला कि देश में एनआरआई कम्युनिटी का बहुत बड़ा रोल हो सकता है. 2003 की बात है, 7 जनवरी 9:30 बजे. प्रवासी भारतीय, आई पैक्ड माई बैग, आई ब्रॉट माई चिल्ड्रन टू इंडिया. दे लिव्ड हियर 10 years. अब वो वापस चले गए. और एक चीज़ मुझे रियलाइजेशन हुआ कि ये दूर से बात करके फ़र्क नहीं पड़ता, बात करने से फ़र्क पड़ता है. So I realized I brought PMI to India, by the way. अगर आप प्रोजेक्ट मैनेजमेंट की चर्चा चुनते हैं, ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन देख रहे हैं, वो PMI की वजह से हुआ. उसका कारण मैं छोटा सा रहा क्योंकि I packed my bag, brought that philosophy to India. Having said that, सस्टेनेबिलिटी का जब सवाल है, आई सॉल्व द बिगेस्ट प्रॉब्लम ऑफ अमेरिका, जो मेरे एंसेस्टर्स शायद दे गए थे, स्क्रैप टायर्स एंड स्लैग फ्रॉम आयरन इंडस्ट्री, बिकॉज आई स्टडीड एट लीहा यूनिवर्सिटी 32 ईयर्स बैक. तो एनवायरमेंटल इंजीनियरिंग के बारे में कौन सोचता है? और 20-32 साल पहले कौन सोचता है? जब हमारी मंजी के नीचे आग नहीं लगती ना, तो हमें कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ता. मंजी मेरी होनी चाहिए, आग भी मेरे नीचे लगनी चाहिए. ओनली देन वी कैन थिंक. सो स्मार्ट, safer and sustainable world. Whose responsibility is this? Enterprises? Yes, of course. But who will get the ball? Who will bear the cat? Of course. Concept क्या है कि हम sustainability और AI को अगर strategy में नहीं घुसेड़ेंगे, जब तक and ownership नहीं own करेंगे, then तब तक that's not possible.
Is there a question?
So question is, we can talk unless every organization, चाहे गवर्नमेंट बॉडी हो या एंटरप्राइजेस हो या इंस्टीट्यूशन है, चीफ सस्टेनेबिलिटी ऑफिसर डलवा दीजिए कंपनी में, काम शुरू हो जाएगा.
Thank you for
Thank
the
you.
comment. Can I have? Yes.
We run an organization which the main mission for it is to foster entrepreneurship in the underdeveloped regions for the underprivileged communities. Now you are talking about, VC funding, inclusive growth. We have figured out a possible formula. There are many formulas, possible way to move ahead. That the underprivileged community, underprivileged people by itself, well, the marginal farmers, they cannot do things by themselves. So we create communities and we support community enterprises. The community enterprises are not typical NGOs that just loosely held. We create companies with legal entities like private limited companies, owned by communities or limited companies. We have several such examples we are trying out for the last several years. Now I have I have a lot of friends in the ecosystem who are VC funds. I know Chris for many years. Chris may not remember me, but we know I have been from the IT industry many years. But I have not seen some of the largest Avishkar, like Avishkar is a very large impact fund. There is no connect. There is no thought. What do we say? There is no relationship. What this whole topic today about, it's very difficult for a VC until it's a philanthropist, in a philanthropy-based home office kind of, they think about it. We have not found a single, fund which will be willing to or invest on. So this whole topic about inclusivity through VC, in the last 15 years I'm working in India, trying to attract, to see whether it's possible, it hasn't happened. Only that possibility I see which has worked out a little bit is government has, done its job, but not the, maybe the philanthropy, there is some trickling. But I think the one thing I'm trying to say is that it's a very strong, process and a very
Sure.
ingrained process. Through community enterprisement, can be created in a very fundamental way. Thank you.
Thank you for the comment. Yes. I think Aditya.
Aditya Jha from Canada. I have a lighter comment, and I'm a chief. One of the roles I have is as a chief mentor for bringing international entrepreneurs to Canada, and I have done many businesses. Sustainability and VCs is just look at the term sheet given to the startup guys, and then you will know that where does the sustainability figure in.
Right. Thank you all for the comments. If there are any questions for the panelists. Just
questions
one,
are nice.
I think
I have a question and a mic. Oh, you want to take
I
the
think
mic?
this
Okay.
Go ahead.
You're welcome. Questions.
Yeah.
All right, the question is,
We'll just
with
take
all
the
of
last
the
two.
illustrious people sitting on the dais, government has allowed CSR money to go towards incubators, accelerators. Can we have your good political officers to have CSR be allowed to be invested in impact funds?
You want to take the questions together? I can add on to that.
I think that.
No answer. She gave a suggestion.
So it's
She's asking you a question. I said you're probably more qualified.
the
That's a
right
question
person
for you,
to
I
ask.
think.
Chris.
There is a long list of requests to CSR funds.
But you are right in front of
No, there is a request from my side, CSR towards research. Okay.
Please say your question.
No, I just said you can take my question together, but yeah, I have a simple question. When we talk of this $5 trillion economy, which is the main theme, how Indiaspora members can help, what do you see as the major so-called hot areas where VCs would be interested in this transition to the $5 trillion economy?
So like, I think in a growing economy like India, I can tell you the 4 areas we would look at. Agriculture, so all upstream industries, what you call primary transformation. So mining, forestry, agriculture, one bucket, right? Whatever that is. Second thing, energy and all energy-related infrastructure. Third is all what we call consumption infrastructure, hospitals, schools, roads, buildings, things of that nature. And then the fourth thing is really youngest population in the world. You need to get these guys deployed, so which means you need to build, whether it is capability building, skills, and technologies, investments. Those are the 4 areas we would look at. But
So, you know, I mean, I can only speak for what we see. I think the era when Chris and Mr. Murthy and others built amazing capabilities in software has provided a fantastic foundation for this country. And I think the destiny for this country is inevitable, that it's going to be in deep tech. And there are lots of amazing tailwinds that actually support it, the least of which is the whole, you know, COVID thing that happened that highlighted the supply chain vulnerability that the world at large has. And, you know, everybody is talking about China plus one, and I think it's inevitable that the only country of scale that can actually be capable of driving global growth in key industries is India. And, you know, whether it's in semiconductors, whether it's in agriculture, whether it's in education, you name the, or healthcare, or, you know, the most important of all is this digital infrastructure. This public digital infrastructure that's been created is stunning, is absolutely stunning. I mean, I don't know if you've had the unique pleasure of standing in DMV to get your license in the US, and as some of us have. It is the most outrageous, you know, it's beyond third world in the US if you have to get your license renewed. And I'm thinking, you know, where is this headed? And now you come to India, and I'll just cite a simple example. I'm in Chennai, and the guy that is driving me to 3 kilometers later, and I'm trying to give him cash, and he won't accept it. He wants, you know, Google Pay or something else. This is stunning. This is a country that didn't have, you know, any of this, you know, 5 years ago. So to me, I think this march towards digital technologies, march towards disruptive sort of deep tech is India's destiny. And that's, you know, as you could imagine, you know, we salivate as VCs to see, you know, such, you know, global forces coming in areas where value can be created.
So on that very positive note, I'd like to thank
Question-
all the
question.
panelists, Chris, Prashant, Sriram, and Prabhat. Thank you so much.
I bring glad tidings to all of you because we have a coffee break for 10 minutes and we'll start our next panel event after that. 10 minutes is all you get.